I think most of you know Matt Leavitt. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Matt, and then I'll introduce our program.
All right. So I'm Matt Leavitt. I'm a general surgical pathologist and hematopathologist, and I left my practice about 10 years ago to start technology companies that will support what we're about to discuss today. I didn't leave my practice to start a company. I'm a physician first and a businessman later. I'm a better physician than I am businessman. But what we're talking about today, what Dave and I are launching, is the culmination of a lot of work, and we're excited to share it with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity. What Dave has done here with not only this conference, but all of the other Grand Rounds and Urology conferences is really quite remarkable, and done so much to connect physicians from different parts of the field. And so I'm really proud to be part of this, and I'd like to thank Dave for all he's done over the years to make this possible.
Well, I first met Matt a number of years ago, and I was impressed with what he was doing with pathology, trying to sort of break away from the mold we've had for so many years. And it really is a disruptive technology. And as a matter of fact, I had the pleasure of delivering a keynote address to one of the LUCPA meetings a couple of years ago that Neil Shore asked me to do on disruptive technologies. And what Matt is doing is clearly disruptive with pathology and the way to handle it and artificial intelligence and things like that. We also discovered there's a lot of unmet needs out there. And we've learned that databases are very important over the years. I don't know how many of you saw 60 Minutes about 6 weeks ago. It was about the Chinese and gathering all the medical data they can. A lot of companies are doing that. That's how a lot of the presentations that were made today were done, data, data, data. What is lacking, and where Matt has an unbelievable vision, is to be able to interplay and interdigitate pathology with his data and with clinicians. That is a missing part that is very difficult. Matt is innovative. We've had some talks about it. He may not be a good businessman, but he has the genes are in his family. His brother was two-time governor of Utah, and he was also health, education, and welfare secretary for George Bush. His other brother, when you go in Salt Lake City, there's the biggest building, happens to be the Leavitt building, and their insurance and everything else they do. But then there's Matt, and he is. I think he's being a little shy here, but he really isn't. And they got a lot of neat things going on. And one of the things that we have a vision about is this thing about integrating pathology and how we're going to do this. And not just in Utah, but around the country. And so this all started when Matt, this whole thing, this DDX Foundation, when Matt called me up probably 9 months ago, I think, and said, hey, my brother does a golf tournament in southern Utah at this golf course. And they've done it for a number of years. It's a Ryder Cup thing, like event. And they have one day for charity, and they've done it for juvenile diabetes for a number of years, and that's a very worthy cause. But they want to get something more broad, like prostate cancer. Would you be interested? And I fell back in my chair, and I said, does a bear, whatever you say, in the woods? And at any rate, we talked about this a little bit, and what we wanted to start this out with a core of institutions, so San Diego, Utah, and Colorado. We have good data banks, biorepositories, that's sort of the basis, and then grow it on a national basis and figure out how to integrate that. And then within about, this is a hard thing to do, within about a couple of weeks, Matt set up this foundation. We want to talk about that. We want to talk about what our vision is and how we want to include everybody. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt now, and we'll discuss some more during the question and answer period. Matt.
Thank you. So, like I said, this meeting is important in the GU community, not just for urologists, but for medical oncologists that treat GU disease, like Dr. Agarwal. Taking care of GU patients is a broad endeavor now. So meetings where people come together and share ideas from different perspectives are important. And so as somebody who grew up here in Utah, who is really proud of our state, I think I'd like to share with you something of historical significance that happened right here in Little Cottonwood Canyon. So how many of you have heard of the Alta Summit before? So the Alta Summit is sort of the genesis of the Human Genome Project. And it happened a mile up the road at Alta Ski Resort. A bunch of smart genetic scientists who were commissioned not to think about the Human Genome Project, but to think about a Department of Energy problem on radiation and baseline mutation. Gathered, it was Ray White from the University of Utah, the father of RFLP technology, and George Church. Now we know him as the father of recombinant technologies, multiplex recombinant technologies. A bunch of the fathers of genetic testing were graduate students at the time, and they were here to try to figure something else out and ski. I think the graduate students were probably here to ski. But the problem is they got snowed in, and instead of skiing, they had to sit around the fire. But that meeting of minds from different perspectives sparked something audacious. This idea that if they didn't make any progress on the problem that they went there to solve, but it sparked the concept of what if we could sequence the whole genome? And when the first person said that, the room laughed. It was so audacious. It was crazy. If you know what identifying genes at that time was like, it was audacious. But 2 years later, that group of people worked with Congress to get the Genome Project passed, and we know the rest is history. So know that you're in a historic place. What Dave and I are proposing here today is not quite that audacious, but it is a moonshot. And so it's important to understand we see that. But we think it's possible. So the problem that we're trying to solve is the disconnect in the genitourinary care community. And I'm not just talking about the disconnect between community practice and academic centers. It's the disconnect between urologists, medical oncologists, radiologists, pathologists. The list is growing because the number of diagnostic options and treatments is growing. And so we have to figure out a way to connect us, and it depends on data. So why is it a big problem? If we ever want to personalize care, individual patients' data needs to be shared between the institutions. In our health system, we don't really have a health system. We have lots of microsystems that aren't very interconnected. And so for us to do that, we have to find a way, if we ever want to keep up on personalized care and provide it to everybody, not just those who are lucky enough to live near an academic center, we have to find a way to share that data. So what are the causes of this disconnect? The causes are, we all know them. We live them in this room. There's the physical divides between hospitals and clinics, and there's the sociological divides, medicine and surgery. You know from the first year of med school whether you're one or the other, and now if you're taking care of a prostate cancer patient, we're both there, both sides of that. Economic divides, we're all pulling tug of war with our competing clinic across town or our competing hospital across town. And then there's the technical data divides, Cerner versus Epic, and all the hundreds of different EMRs that all the private clinics have. And then there's pathology. Pathology is a pain in the neck. I can say that because I am one. I shouldn't say pathologists are a pain in the neck, but we can be. And and yet it's foundational. So many decisions are based on whether it's anatomic pathology or whether it's the small blood sample that leads to the next-gen sequencing. It's all going through this laboratory. And we tend to be in the basement of hospitals and disconnected from people. And that creates problems. So how do we get over that? Well, the purpose of this DDX Foundation is to accelerate progress in cancer treatment by making the sharing of clinical specimens and data seamless. That sounds audacious. That's maybe, I was waiting for the laugh in the room, but that's what we're about. It's a public nonprofit which builds and supports clinical data exchanges. Exchange is a nice word for marketplace. But it has to be governed by physicians. It has to be governed by the people who have to look the patient in the eye and feel good about what they're doing. Yet, we as physicians, I know from firsthand experience, we're not business people, and we're not technology developers. I've tried to do both. I've tried to do all three, and I'm still a better physician than I am in any of the others. But to do this, and to do it well, we need all three to work together. Now, health exchanges are not a new idea. They've been around. I remember when my brother was Secretary of Health and Human Services, I remember him dealing with this. He set up the first health IT standards. It wasn't his idea, but he was involved in that and trying to find ways to get interoperability, and the teams that led to HL7 and those kinds of early interfaces that we still use, that was being set up. And I was a resident, and I remember I got an elective at the NIH, and I didn't do a very good job on the elective because I just really wanted to follow him around and learn as much as I could. But they were understanding at the NIH, and I remember him talking about trying to get this kind of interoperability and saying, we figured this out in the banking sector. You can go to any ATM and you can get your information from your bank, and yet in healthcare we can't do it. So they came up with this idea of healthcare exchanges, and there are lots of healthcare exchanges. So what I'm saying in that is this is not a new idea. This has been around for a long time, that we need to be able to create these exchanges. The problem is that the exchanges that exist today are mostly financially motivated, and yet they still depend on us as providers, clinics, to provide the data and do all the work. So it's a great deal for the exchanges, because if they can get it to work, because they get the value of our patients' data, and we do all the work, and we've all sort of felt that sort of intrinsic wrongness in that. That's how most of them are set up, and it's good for them, not very good for us as physicians and clinics, and frankly, not good for patients. How will the DDX Foundation differ? It's owned, no one owns it, it's a public entity. But it's governed by physicians, it's governed by the people who are seeing the patients. And we find economic alignment with technology companies and industry. So we utilize disruptive technologies to better serve our patients and to leverage market forces to our advantage, to incentivize participation. That's the hard part. You can dream about this all day long, but how do you get clinics and hospitals to change? Change is really, really hard. Trust me, I know. The way you drive change is, they have to, it's usually not with a vision. It's usually, if I don't change, I'm in trouble. And so you can, I've heard my brother say many times, there's 3 ways you can navigate inevitable change. Change is coming whether you like it or not. And things like AI and machine learning based diagnostics, that is inevitable. There's no stopping that. And so how are we going to deal with this? The 3 ways you can deal with it are, you can fight it, and if you're the last person to do it, good luck, you won't be around long. You can sort of wait and see, which is what 80% of the healthcare groups do, and you might survive. Or you can lead it and prosper. And I'm hoping that I'm talking to a lot of people that are willing to lead it and prosper here. How does it work? So I'm going to go into some details now. It's a network of clinic and hospital biorepositories. Initially, we just worked together for research, a research context. And our goal is to standardize the informed consent process, because that's changing in big ways, in ways that are inevitable. We can't stop patients' fear of having their data and personal information used. That's bigger than us. And so consent process is changing. If you're part of a multi-group institution that's in multiple states, you're going to have to deal with laws that are completely different, and some of them really restrictive in some states. We got to lead that and know how to do that. And and a company I'll highlight today, I have no interest in that company. I just share their vision. And so I'm going to, and so for now, the DDX Foundation is going to work with that company. It's called Consent Vault. Specimen handling. Now, this is the work I've been in, and I'll just plainly declare that I have a conflict of interest here. Lumea is a company that does specimen handling. But it does it in a way that I don't know that anyone else does, and it automates processes that make the clinic's life a lot easier and a lot cheaper. So we drive standardized data curation by making life in the clinic easier. And then, so those are the problems that we need to do in order to create this network of hospital and clinic biorepositories with a standardized data curation. But here's the driver. None of this happens unless there is some economic fuel, unless there's money involved. And unfortunately, money drives change faster than quality. I hate to say that, but we've all experienced it. Curated data sets create value. A curated data set where everything is done the same way and automated is going to be far more valuable than a spreadsheet that was created by your resident. It is just the fact. And the scale, the fact that you can do that on a national scale now, is going to make that data set far more valuable and far better for the things that the consumers or buyers of that data, pharma, they're going to want that data. DDX Foundation doesn't own the data. This is a critical thing. It's a public trust. It doesn't own the tissue. It doesn't own the data. The clinics who provide it, the hospitals who align with it, they own the tissue, they own the data, and they entrust it to this physician-governed entity. And that entity handles the transactions with third parties such as pharma. The value from those transactions doesn't stay in DDX. DDX passes that through to the clinic providers. To do this, you have to have aligned technology partners under the guidance of the clinical providers who so that we can integrate that data and curate it into, and it has to be integrated with clinical workflows. It's never going to work unless it's easier and faster and more effective in the clinic. So that reduces costs, it creates standardization, and enables the interoperability. So I'm going to walk you through a patient that has prostate cancer, shows up at the clinic. We're going to go through the informed consent process, the curated data process, and the data exchange, and then what does it look like on the marketplace when somebody wants to use your data. Actually, not your data, your patient's data. Your patient comes in, you're about to do the prostate biopsy or whatever procedure you do. The Consent Vault, and some folks are here from Consent Vault if you want to talk to them afterwards. Consent Vault not only handles the consent for that procedure, but remember, in personalized medicine, you're going to need to come back to that sample 2 years from now, 5 years from now, maybe even later. How do you deal with that consent? And I know how healthcare institutions are doing it today. Patient comes in and they quickly sign something and no one knows. And we could feel okay about that, but I don't think patients are going to do that, and I think it's going to change regardless of how we feel about it. So, Consent Vault, and I suspect there are other companies like that. Again, I don't own this, and DDX Foundation is just looking for a solution. Lumea, I do own this. There's a huge conflict of interest, but I don't know anyone else who does this, and this is how we can get started, and so we can lead by example. Lumea has created this edge computing. We're utilizing edge computing. How many of you have heard of edge computing, just by raise of hand? You've heard of cloud computing. Cloud computing was the revolution in the early 2000s. Edge computing is here now. So edge computing means being able to have computing power that is so much better than it used to be that we can actually do AI at point of care. It's the same thing that does sensors in autonomous driving vehicles. It's the same thing. We're using edge technologies all the time and we don't even know it. It's not diagnosing anything. It's simply documenting things. But by placing edge technology, as cool as it is to talk about the technical side of it, there's a business argument here. And that's what we were going after, because we know that economics drives change perhaps faster than quality. Quality does improve vastly with this. With this, the specimens are analyzed in terms of the gross examination is done at the bedside. It's in the clinic. Therefore, the clinic owns the data, and the clinic can get paid for that test. And now, it's less expensive, it's more cost effective, and the clinic owns the data. That's one example of how, by automating the curation of this data, we can drive this. That goes into a regional biorepository. Rather than having a histology lab in every little clinic or every little hospital, they share. We've done this in Michigan, in Arkansas. When I say we, I'm the CEO of Pathnet. I created these biorepositories, one in Michigan, one in Arkansas, one in Utah. It's co-owned by the clinics. We can produce digital histology at scale at a fraction of the cost. That's what drives adoption. And they own the data, they own the specimens, but it's now centralized. And it's in one place, and it's so much more efficient. What we envision now is having those regional biorepositories, and there'll be more, and we want to tie in hospitals, because they have biorepositories, as Dave alluded to. Those will go into a central data exchange. Again, Foundation doesn't own it. Clinics own the tissue and the data. Clinics govern, not clinics, physicians govern the DDX Foundation. Then when someone wants to come and utilize that data, if it's anonymized, if it's for retrospective research, they can purchase anonymized data. If it's for clinical trials, they can work with the clinic to get re-identified data on that patient. They click on, I need to be able to do a central review of the pathology to know whether it's truly Gleason 3 or 4, and they have it. They didn't have to send it off, they didn't have to wait 2 or 3 weeks while the patient's cancer is continuing to grow and drive them crazy. They have it instantly. And this is an example of Gleason 3 in blue and Gleason 4 in red, and it's not our algorithm, there are dozens of these companies doing algorithms out there. Why does it work? Alignment of incentives. Patients have their data and biosamples protected and handled in a more ethical and thoughtful way than they do today, and that will be needed. Clinics now have streamlined workflow, reduced costs, and they're incented because they can do their work, the work that they were trained to do, better. Technology companies who seize the moment can become part of a new clinically defined standard. Researchers and clinical trial providers can access the data, not just from their hospital or hospitals like them, but from clinics and patients from all demographics around the country. And clinical data contributors, clinics or hospitals, can better monetize the value of their data due to curation and standardization. That's the concept, that's the why. DDX will do this for all types, all subspecialties, but we're starting in urology. It's a very disconnected community. Conferences like this are rare. And so by bringing the different groups together, I think we can show something that would be applied to all medical and surgical subspecialties. The name of the initiative is GUIDE, Genital Urinary Integrated Data Exchange. And this is, I've gone from clinic to sort of a little bit kitsch here, but it's an opportunity for us to come together to try to raise some money for something that we will govern together and own together. There's value in this. And we've gotten some good support from the Red Rock Roadrunners who went out and got the Utah Jazz and the Las Vegas Raiders to co-sponsor it. As Dave said, it'll be a red, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an idea about this because I'm inviting you to come. I'm inviting you to come and participate and contribute to this and be part of the planning and the governance of this. And it happens the week of AUA. So a couple days before AUA, it is an hour-and-a-half drive to St. George, Utah, but it's at the gates of Zion National Park, and if you come, we'll make sure you never forget it.
Right.
That's it.